In 1940, a German U-boat crew has just been pulled from the frigid North Atlantic. Their submarine lies somewhere on the ocean floor. Now they're crammed into the hold of a British destroyer, soaked, shivering, terrified. They'd been told stories. Propaganda broadcasts painted British captors as ruthless, vengeful, ready to exact revenge for every bomb that fell on London. So when they finally stumble onto British soil, herded into camps surrounded by barbed wire and watchtowers, they brace for the worst. What they get instead is something they couldn't possibly have anticipated. Fish and chips wrapped in newspaper, served every Friday at 6 o'clock sharp. The first POW camps established in Britain during 1940 were hastily built, often repurposed. Military barracks or country estates requisitioned for the war effort. By mid-1941, Britain held about 1,500 German prisoners. That number would swell to over 400,000 by war's end. These men arrived with preconceptions shaped by Goebbels' propaganda machine. They expected torture, starvation, humiliation. The WWII, Nazi propaganda ministry, had spent years conditioning German soldiers to fear capture, circulating horror stories of Allied brutality. So when these prisoners shuffled through camp gates and were handed tin plates told to queue for meals, many assumed it was a facade, a temporary act before the real punishment began. Camp routines were strict but predictable. Roll call at dawn, work details during the day, lights out at 10. The guards, many older men from the Home Guard or soldiers deemed unfit for frontline duty, maintained order without the cruelty these Germans expected, but it was the food that became the first real test of their assumptions. Meals arrived on schedule. Portions followed Red Cross guidelines, a standard Britain upheld even as its own civilians endured rationing. The Germans watched, waited, wondered when the other shoe would drop. Then Friday came. That first Friday in camp, something changed. Guards who'd been stern all week suddenly seemed almost cheerful. The usual smells of boiled vegetables and weak tea were replaced by something entirely different. Hot oil, salt, vinegar cutting through the air. Prisoners noticed the guards, gathering near the kitchen with an enthusiasm they'd never shown for Monday's mutton stew. Some were smiling, joking, and when the food emerged, it came wrapped in old newspapers, grease already smudging the ink. The Germans stared at these parcels with deep suspicion. Whatever punishment the British had planned, it was clearly beginning now. The human mind under stress searches for patterns, especially threatening ones. These German POWs carried mental frameworks built by years of Nazi indoctrination about enemy barbarism. Goebbels' ministry had distributed leaflets to Wehrmacht, soldiers claiming British camps used starvation as official policy, that captives were fed animal feed mixed with sawdust. Another suggested prisoners were subjected to scientific experiments involving deliberate malnutrition. These weren't random scare tactics. They were designed to make German soldiers fight harder, surrender less, and interpret everything through a lens of victimhood and suspicion. When these men encountered actual British rations, their interpretation was predictable. The food wasn't familiar, therefore it must be substandard. It wasn't German, therefore it must be punishment. This bias had historical roots. During World War I, German POWs in Britain had suffered, not from deliberate cruelty but from the U-boat blockade that starved Britain itself. By 1917, both captors and captives were malnourished. That memory lingered, passed down through families and military culture. Older Wehrmacht soldiers in 1940 sometimes had fathers who'd been British prisoners. Those stories shaped expectations. There was another layer. The German military's own treatment of prisoners created a psychological mirror. By 1941, conditions in German camps, especially those holding Soviet POWs, were catastrophic. Of the 5.7 million Soviets captured, about 3 million died, many from deliberate neglect and hunger. German soldiers knew this even if they didn't speak of it. It created an unconscious assumption. If we treat prisoners this way, surely the enemy does worse. Projection became expectation. So when the British served them food, the Germans interpreted it through a filter of fear. Wartime rationing had transformed British cuisine into something unrecognizable, even to Brits. Butter, 2 ounces per week. Meat, 1 shilling's worth. Sugar, 8 ounces. The Ministry of Food pushed recipes using powdered eggs, dried milk, and vegetables grown in backyard gardens. The Dig for Victory campaign. What the Germans were eating wasn't punishment rations. It was the same food British families ate, sometimes better, because the Geneva Convention required POWs receive adequate nutrition. Yet the Germans couldn't see it that way. Boiled cabbage, reconstituted potatoes, bread stretched with oat flour. All of it seemed designed to demoralize. They were waiting for the cruelty to escalate, for the masks to drop. They didn't realize. The British were simply feeding them British food, prepared the British way under British wartime restrictions. The real shock was still coming. Wrapped in yesterday's newspaper, smelling of malt vinegar in the sea. Breakfast set the tone. Porridge like gray paste. Tea strong enough to strip paint. Bread that crumbled like sawdust. One Luftwaffe pilot, Klaus Hartmann, wrote in his diary that it looked like something scraped from a stable floor. Lunch brought more boiled vegetables, carrots, turnips, parsnips, cabbage, all cooked until any flavor or texture surrendered. British cooks, often local women volunteers, followed ministry guidelines religiously. One 1941 recipe card recommended boiling cabbage for 25 minutes. The Germans, used to sauerkraut with tang and crunch, saw only proof of malicious intent. Some refused to eat, convinced the food was tainted. Then came the truly bewildering items. Spotted Dick appeared on the menu at Camp 100 in Lancashire in October 1940. The Germans examined this steamed sweet pudding studded with currants with genuine alarm. The name sounded like a medical condition. The texture, dense, heavy, vaguely sweet, was alien. Was this food or insulation? A panzer commander named Friedrich Weber reportedly told a guard he'd rather be shot than eat something called dicker. The guard, a Yorkshire farmer, laughed so hard he had to sit down. He explained it was dessert. His mother made it. Weber remained unconvinced. Powdered eggs were another source of suspicion. Shipped from America under Lend-Lease, reconstituted. With water, they created something egg-like, but with an unsettling texture and sulfurous smell. Germans watched British guards eat scrambled powder eggs without complaint and concluded either the British had no taste buds, or they'd been broken by their own cuisine. Both theories spread through the camps. The bread? National wheatmeal bread, denser, darker, stretched with oat or potato flour. Prisoners nicknamed it Ziegelstein brick. They'd tap it on tables to prove its strength. One prisoner, Otto Kraus, a baker from Hamburg, called it a crime against wheat, against God, against Germany. Friday morning started like any other. Roll call, work assignments, boots on gravel, commands echoing across the compound. But by mid-afternoon, something shifted. The guards seemed lighter, more animated. Groups gathered near the kitchen, chatting with energy absent on Thursday. When you're locked behind wire, you notice everything. Changes might mean danger or opportunity. Around 4 o'clock, a truck arrived. Not the usual supply lorry, but a smaller van with writing on the side. Guards unloaded wooden boxes steaming in the cold air. The kitchen staff moved with purpose, almost excitement. Word rippled through the camp in whispers. Something special was happening. Special could mean trouble. By 5:30, the smell hit them. Hot oil, salt, something savory and utterly unfamiliar, but unmistakably real food. Not the boiled mush of the week. Prisoners drifted to windows. Some recognized the smell of frying, but this was richer, with a tang they couldn't place. Then the guards queued. That's what made it strange. These soldiers who enforced discipline, who kept distance, they were now lining up outside the kitchen like schoolboys waiting for sweets, chatting, laughing. When the first received their newspaper-wrapped parcels, grease spreading across headlines, they didn't eat in private. They sat on benches, unwrapping carefully. Sergeant Roberts, stern all week, bit into his parcel and closed his eyes in satisfaction. The Germans watched, confused. If this was punishment, why were the guards so eager? Why the ceremony? The pleasure, one prisoner, Hans Dietrich, turned to his bunkmate. It's a trick. They want us to see them enjoying it. Then they'll give us something worse. It made sense through the lens of expected cruelty. When the call came for prisoners to line up, they approached cautiously. The serving window opened. There it was. Newspaper parcels, hot, grease seeping through. Each got one, identical to the guards. No malice, no smirking. Just tired cooks handing out food. The prisoners took their parcels back to the mess hall, set them down, and stared. Nobody wanted to be first. The parcels sat there steaming, newsprint curling from heat, while an entire hall of German soldiers engaged in a silent standoff with Friday dinner. Eventually, hunger won. Paul Schmidt, a young submariner barely 20, decided he'd rather face poison than another night of stomach cramps. He unwrapped his parcel like defusing a bomb. The Daily Mirror from 2 days prior peeled back, revealing golden brown fish still crackling faintly. 2 pieces. One was clearly fish, white, flaky, encased in a crispy architectural batter. The other was potato, thick-cut, caramelized edges, fluffy inside. Salt crystals sparkled. Liquid pooled beneath. He sniffed. Sharp, acidic. Vinegar, stronger than Bavarian Sunday salads. Schmidt lifted the fish. Still hot. He bit through the batter first, crunch. That primal sound. The coating shattered. Then the fish. Mild, clean, impossibly moist. His face betrayed him. The whole hall watched. Schmidt chewed slowly. This wasn't punishment. This was good. Not just edible, genuinely satisfying. He dunked a chip in vinegar. Crispy outside, fluffy inside. The vinegar cut the oil. He wanted another bite immediately. Around the hall, others began unwrapping. The realization spread like a wave. Otto Kraus, the baker who'd condemned British bread, bit into his fish and laughed. A startled bark that shocked everyone, including himself. Friedrich Weber, who'd refused spotted dick, devoured his meal in 3 minutes, then spent 5 licking grease from his fingers, staring at the empty paper with something like grief. The guards watched, amused. Sergeant Roberts walked through the hall, ostensibly checking order, really savoring the spectacle. Friday meant fish and chips. Every Friday, Ernst Müller called out in broken English, "Every Friday." Roberts nodded. "Every Friday," Müller translated. 7 soldiers, battle-hardened, disciplined, broke into genuine smiles. The science was simple. Fat, salt, and the Maillard reaction, browning that creates complex flavors, hit pleasure receptors dulled since capture. Crispy texture activated senses boiled food couldn't, and seeing guards eat the same meal dissolved the us versus them barrier. This wasn't cruelty. This was just Friday. Within days, letters flowed out. The Red Cross allowed correspondence, censored, but uncensored on one topic. Friday dinners, Ole Heinrich Vogel wrote to his wife in Stuttgart. November 1941. You will not believe what I must tell you. The British have a custom. Every Friday, without fail, they eat fish fried in crisp dough with potatoes prepared in a way I cannot describe. The guards eat the same meal. The same, Maria. I watched a British sergeant, a private, and a German corporal all eating identical parcels. For 20 minutes on Friday evening, there are no enemies in this camp. Only men eating fish. His wife kept that letter for 40 years. In a family Bible, Imperial War Museum archives hold hundreds like it. A pattern emerges: suspicion, confusion, reluctant appreciation, anticipation. Paul Schmidt wrote to his mother in March 1942. I've marked my calendar. 4 more days until Friday. Does this make me a collaborator? But you must understand, after 6 days of gray meals, Friday brings color, warmth, the small mercy of something that tastes intentional. Camp records show behavioral shifts. At Camp 21 in Comrie, Scotland, the commanding officer noted in July 1942, disciplinary incidents drop markedly from Wednesday onward each week. Prisoners moderate behavior in anticipation of Friday meal privileges. This is not official policy, yet the psychological effect is undeniable. Klaus Hartmann, who once mocked porridge, wrote in December 1943, "We are treated better as enemies than we treated conquered peoples as victors." This knowledge sits heavy. I think of the Polish families whose homes we took in 1939. Did we feed them? Did we think of their Fridays? Dangerous thoughts. His letter never left the camp, but survived in records, testimony to a moral reckoning. Fish and chips became symbolic. When guards and prisoners ate the same meal, it was a weekly demonstration. We are not you. We do not starve prisoners. We maintain standards even when our enemy doesn't. For some, it was their first encounter with the idea that strength didn't require cruelty. The war ended in May 1945. But repatriation took months, sometimes years. German POWs stayed in Britain through 1946 and 1947, working farms, helping rebuild infrastructure their bombers had damaged. During this strange interim, no longer enemies, not yet free, the Friday tradition continued. Some had eaten fish and chips nearly every week for 5 years. It had become their tradition too. When repatriation came, some requested one final Friday meal. Camp commanders, many of whom had guarded these men for years, often obliged. At Camp 18 in Featherston Park, New Zealand, the last group departing in February 1948 received fish and chips wrapped in newspaper for the journey home. Sergeant Roberts, who'd served since 1941, shook hands with men he'd guarded for 7 years. "Don't forget your Fridays, yours," he said. Several admitted they'd missed the routine more than anything else. In the decades that followed, former POWs returned as tourists. Some sought battlefields. Others searched for fish and chip shops near their old camps. Ver never opened his Bavarian restaurant. Post-war Germany had bigger concerns. But in 1962 he returned with his family. They drove to Derby, found the shop that supplied his camp, ordered cod and chips. His daughter Greta later recalled her father weeping quietly as he ate, though he never explained why. Hinrich Vogel, the teacher, took his students to Lancaster in 1971, officially educational. But his real goal? Fish and chips. They ate on a bench, grease on their hands, vinegar sharp in the autumn air. "This," and he told them, "is what taught me that enemies are made, not born, and what is made can be unmade." Decades later, Dr. Sarah Matthews at the University of Manchester studied food's role in psychology during WWII. Her interviews revealed a consistent theme. The Friday ritual gave structure, predictability, and proof of shared humanity. One subject, Joseph Klein, said, "When you eat the same food as your guard, you cannot maintain the fiction that you are different species. The potato doesn't know whether it's feeding a German or an Englishman. Neither does the fish." Today, British fish and chip shops display black and white photos of queues with newspapers tucked under arms. Some near former camps have plaques noting their wartime role. In Comrie, Scotland, a local shop has a framed letter from a former POW who visited in 1983. "Thank you for feeding a homesick boy who didn't know he could find comfort in enemy food." The last verified German POW held in Britain, Otto Fischer, died in 2019 at 97. Until his final years, he insisted on fish and chips every Friday, exactly as he remembered. Crispy batter, proper chips, malt vinegar, salt, wrapped in newspaper. When asked why he kept the tradition 70 years after liberation, he said simply, "Other camps reported similar patterns. Prisoners volunteered for extra work on Thursdays, though the meal wasn't conditional. The ritual had meaning beyond nutrition. Some requested British cookbooks via the Red Cross." Ver, a signals officer from Munich, wrote multiple letters asking his sister to document how to make English battered fish. He planned to open a restaurant in Bavaria after the war. His sister thought he'd lost his mind. Censors flagged the letters, then concluded, "The poor man is genuinely obsessed with fried fish." The psychological impact ran deeper. These men lived in suspended animation, war continuing without them, futures uncertain. Control had been stripped away, but Friday became a fixed point, a reliable pleasure in a world of unreliable everything else. Dr. Franz Becker, a physician captured at Tobruk, wrote in his journal, "The human spirit requires small kindnesses to survive prolonged hardship. I didn't expect the British to understand this. Yet here we are. Every Friday a small kindness arrives wrapped in newspaper." Some guards explained the tradition, how fish and chips became a Victorian working-class staple, how Catholic meatless Fridays merged with cheap street food. Prisoners listened, asked questions, drew parallels to their own cultures. These conversations, enemy soldiers discussing food, not war, were rare in conflict. The Geneva Convention of 1929 mandated that POWs receive food equivalent to depot troops of the detaining power. Britain took this seriously, not from altruism but reciprocity. About 170,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers were in German captivity. Their survival depended partly on how Germany treated British-held POWs. Western Front prisoners, British, American, French, generally received treatment aligned with Geneva standards. Harsh but survivable. Roughly 4% died in German hands. The Eastern Front told a different story. Soviet POWs faced systematic extermination. Camp Stalag 326 and Stammlager held mostly Soviets. Over 65,000 died, most from starvation German commanders could have prevented. Nazi ideology deemed Slavs subhuman. The Soviet Union hadn't signed the convention, giving Germany a legal excuse for ideological cruelty. Some German POWs in British camps had served on the Eastern Front. They'd seen men eat grass, bark anything to survive. Now they received 2,500, 3,000 calories daily. Hans Dietrich, who suspected the fish was a trick, had served in Ukraine. He wrote, "I cannot reconcile what I saw us do with what they do to us. Either we are not the men I thought we were, or they are not the enemy I was told to fight." By 1943, British camps evolved. Prisoners organized education, theater, music. Camp 186 in Lancashire formed a full orchestra, 23 Germans performing Beethoven for guards and fellow prisoners alike. And every Friday, without fail, fish and chips. Even as V-2 rockets fell on London, the contrast wasn't lost. When asked why he kept the tradition 70 years after liberation, he said simply, "It reminds me that people are just people, even when governments tell us otherwise. That lesson costs millions of lives to learn. I honor it every Friday." His obituary ran alongside a photo, Fisher at 23 in British captivity, and at 95 holding a newspaper parcel of fish and chips, smiling the same smile in both pictures, the smile of a man who discovered something unexpected and chose never to forget it.